This
Cool.
book, Shadow of the Sith, this was written by Adam Christopher, which I believe this is his first full Star Wars novel. I don't know if he had taken part in any of the kind of collection of stories books that we've gotten in the past. I don't remember if he did any of those, but I believe this is his first full novel. Publishers Del Rey. This came out June 28th of 2022, and the publisher's summary. I'll try to speed through this because it's pretty long. Luke Skywalker and Lando Calrissian return in this essential novel set between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. The Empire is dead. Nearly 2 decades on from the Battle of Endor, the tattered remnants of Palpatine's forces have fled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But for the heroes of the New Republic, danger and loss are ever-present companions, even in this newly forged era of peace. Jedi Master Luke Skywalker is haunted by visions of the dark side, foretelling an ominous secret growing somewhere in the depths of space, on a dead world called Exegol. The disturbance of the Force is undeniable, and Luke's worst fears are confirmed when his old friend Lando Calrissian comes to him with reports of a new Sith menace. After his daughter was stolen from his arms, Lando searched the stars for any trace of his lost child, but every new rumor only led to dead ends and fading hopes, until he crossed paths with Ochi of Bestoon, a Sith assassin tasked with kidnapping a young girl. Ochi's true motives remain shrouded to Luke and Lando, for on a junkyard moon, a mysterious envoy of the Sith Eternal has bequeathed a secret blade to the assassin, promising that it will give him answers to the questions that have haunted him since the Empire fell. In exchange, he must complete a final mission, return to Exegol with the key to the Sith's glorious rebirth, the granddaughter of Darth Sidious himself, Rey. As Ochi hunts Rey and her parents to the edge of the galaxy, Luke and Lando race into the mystery of the Sith lingering shadow and aid a young family running for their lives. So, yeah, that's a lot. You know, we get Rey's parents
Yeah.
as main characters in a novel, and basically filling in the entire story of, you know, what led to her being left on Jakku. I was surprised. I remember when I first saw the announcement of this book and I saw the cover and I saw the description, I'm like, whoa, they're doing this? Like, that seems like something we wouldn't touch, you know, like Luke after Return of the Jedi, you know, as kind of a main focus in dealing with like Sith artifacts and all that stuff. I don't know. It felt off limits. It felt like I was going to read a book I wasn't allowed to read kind of situation.
Yeah, I honestly, okay, so you sent me a link to the book and you were like, "Hey, let's do this one." And I was like, "Cool," without knowing at all what the book was about, but it had a pretty sweet looking cover. So I was like, "Okay, let's do this." And as I started reading it, my I wasn't to the extent that you were where it's like, "Oh, this is off limits." But my immediate thought was I know the main characters of this book now. Like from the very beginning, you're introduced to the main characters of the book. I spent the entire book, page after page, trying to figure out how it was going to work, right? Like how are all these characters involved, and yet how do we get to where we are at the Force Awakens that ultimately none of them know that each other exists, even though this entire book is about all of them. Um,
That
that
was
that
that was
honestly kept me turning the pages.
Yeah, and that was kind of revealing too, because you do kind of assume that Rey wasn't known of, you know,
Yeah,
wasn't known about, and she was kind of like a complete surprise. But we find out that actually Luke and Lando were very aware of that family and
yeah.
that the Sith were hunting them. And they kind of, there was a line, and I wish I had time to go back and rewatch the entire sequel trilogy to kind of have it fresh in my mind, so how it connects to the book. But unfortunately, I didn't have time to watch any of them before before recording this. But I remember there was a line in The Rise of Skywalker, I think when Luke's Force Ghost is talking to Rey, and he mentions that Leia knew that Rey was related to Palpatine.
Mhm.
And I remember them dropping that line and thinking, oh, that's interesting. How did she know? Or like, what, there's more to that line, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I think this book, although it doesn't fully explain that, it does at least show us that Rey wasn't a complete surprise to these characters. Like
Mm.
Luke was essentially searching for Rey,
Right.
which is news, news to me.
Yeah, he was searching for Ray, and I think with every turn of the page that I was doing, it was like, is Luke going to be in close enough proximity to Ray at some point that when he finally meets her later on, there will be that recognition of like, oh, okay, I know who you are. But at every turn of the page, something would happen where Luke would never be the one that was actually close to the family. It would always be another character because of the shadow of the Sith that's looming that Luke is consistently chasing throughout the entire book.
Right.
That dynamic I thought was just interesting throughout the book because I had those questions that I wanted to answer. And I was just waiting for that like flaw to be like, oh, how are they going to explain that? And it never happened.
Yeah. And I should at least say here, sometimes I forget spoilers. We are going to talk. We're going to talk about this book, everything that happened in it. And so we will be talking about spoilers. So if you haven't read the book yet and you're not quite ready for spoilers, maybe come back after you've read the book. But we will get into some of the more spoilery details. It's a kind of a Lando Luke team up book. It's not a duo we see too often in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Even in the books and comics, they've definitely hung out some, but they're not the typical team up. I thought they were an interesting dynamic, but they obviously close friends, get along. There isn't any moments really that there's a lot of strife between the two characters. Maybe a couple of little disagreements, but I thought they were a fun team up because you have Luke, who's more kind of from Tatooine, rustic kind of background. Now he's a Jedi and they're kind of minimalists. And then they have Lando, who's the opposite of all of that. He's,
Right.
likes to live in luxury, dresses, really flamboyantly. And it was a nice kind of yin yang type of dynamic.
Yeah. And the author definitely didn't try to hide that dynamic at all. Right. Like they called it out in multiple interactions, whether it's where Lando has no fear in downing drinks, and yet he notices that Luke, as the minimalist Jedi who is abstaining, is sitting there kindly, like holding the drink, but never drink it at all. And like they play off of that multiple times. Lando recognizes it, Luke recognizes it. That dynamic of how they pair together, it definitely was called out multiple instances throughout.
And Lando's trying to give him his like best drink. Like he's like, oh, I got the good stuff. And like, let's drink. And then he's like noticing that Luke's not actually drinking it.
Right.
He makes a comment later on in the book where he's like, maybe you actually drink it this time.
Right.
And
yep.
I was trying to think in my head, have we ever seen Luke drink in anything canon? Has he ever partaken in alcohol?
Oh, I was gonna say blue milk. That's all. With
no, but like
that was the only
like
thing.
an alcoholic drink, like
Right.
or has he literally not ever had? Is he completely a sober character that's never had alcohol? I'll have to like do my research on that a little bit and see if there's something I'm thinking of that there probably is. He's been in so much material at this point.
Right.
There has to be at some point that he picked up a drink and drank something, but not like Obi-Wan where there's some obvious places where we could pull out. Oh yeah, he definitely is. He definitely likes to have a drink every once in a while. Luke is, I don't know. He may not be a drinker.
Cut from a different cloth.
Yeah,
quite literally.
So Ochi of Bestoon, another character that was dropped on us in The Rise of Skywalker. We see his skeleton. We see where they find him underneath on Pisana, underneath the sinking sands or whatever it's called. And they find his skeleton and the blade, the Sith blade. So we got, tons of backstory on all that within this book. Now, Ochi, you probably aren't aware of this, maybe even some of our listeners. I know like a lot of our listeners are more focused on the novels and not as much the comics, but we do mention the comics from time to time. And he has actually appeared a lot in the comics.
That's what I found out, that
Yeah.
this is not his first appearance in something that is written.
Yeah. So if you follow the comics, I will admit, still, I say it all the time, I'm behind. I'm not caught up on all these stories, but he had makes some pretty major appearances in the comics. Even has like a completely different look with like a mask that he wears, so he doesn't quite look like the character that we know from this. But he's in the Darth Vader comics. He interacts with Vader, Emperor, Kira, the
Oh yeah, I saw
yeah
that mentioned
he's
too.
yeah he's all over the place. So it definitely, reading this book has me more interested in going and trying to catch up on some of those stories, because it sounds like he had all kinds of adventures and things going on in those stories that led to some of his experiences in this book.
Yeah, I mean, the way that he's described, at least in this book, he's a straight up fanatic, right? Like he has drank the Sith Kool-Aid, um, as much as one possibly could. He has been to Exegol and he wants to get back. He
Yes.
has tasted that life and he wants more of it.
And I
Um,
think, isn't it part of the reason he wants to get back is because he actually suffers some pretty horrific injuries. I believe it's shown in the comics where he loses his eyes and
yeah,
gets scarred, and he thinks by if he can make it back to Exegol, he can actually be made whole again.
right. They'll
And
restore him.
yeah, so that's his major, I guess, motivation to try to get back there.
Yeah.
I You said he kind of drank the Sith Kool-Aid. I kind of maybe didn't read it the same way. I feel like he seems to be a character that's kind of very self-serving in a
Mm.
lot of ways, and almost a tool of the Sith, more so than him actually being kind of part of the larger Sith group. Maybe I was misreading it, or maybe it was because I did both the audiobook and the regular novel.
Okay.
And the way the audiobook, even the voice they give him, he's almost like this like low life snivelly kind of character that you don't have a lot of respect for.
Okay.
And so maybe I missed out on some key lines that had that led you to say that he drank the Sith Kool-Aid. But I saw him more as the Sith are just using this guy, and he's basically suffered some injuries because of it, and now wants to go back and get himself restored.
I think I think you have a good read on it. When I say drink the Sith Kool-Aid, I mean he is of full belief that they are going to be able to provide him what he is ultimately seeking. Like that restoration, that being made whole, like they have made promises to him and he's expecting them to keep it. But as far as being self-serving, oh, most definitely. Like he's out there not necessarily to serve any agenda other than to achieve what he ultimately wants. So yeah, self-serving
He's
to
very
to
he's
the end.
very cocky, very high on himself,
Ooh, yeah.
very impressed with himself. And it's ultimately his downfall uh in the end of the book, but maybe we'll save some of that for later discussion. But yeah, he's a cocky dude and he doesn't have the credentials to back it up. It feels like he thinks he's like the greatest
Well,
Jedi hunter and assassin and all this stuff.
I think, and maybe I'm missing some context, but he could go toe to toe with Mace Windu and survive. I feel like he's able to cash a few of the checks that his mouth writes. Like the fact that he hunted Jedi, we have that excerpt from the book where he fends off Mace Windu with his dagger or with a weapon of some sort. He doesn't have the dagger yet, but the fact that he survived, it's like okay, there is something else to this guy.
Yeah, and Luke does, when he ends up facing Luke later in the book as well, and he has the dagger. Luke kind of came in like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this guy down quick. And then he was surprised by how fast he was. But I thought some of that was because of the powers that he was almost gaining through the dagger. Like
Yeah,
it wasn't because he was skilled, but more the dagger was helping him. The dark side was kind of, leaking into him, I guess, and giving him the powers to kind of be able to face Luke a little bit, but ultimately still not able to face up against a true Jedi Master.
I don't know if we want to talk about this, or maybe I can ask this now. But that dagger, that is still what one lingering question I have in my mind, because that is the same dagger that shows up in Rise of Skywalker, right?
Yes.
And that dagger seemed to interact with Ochi to some extent, right? Like it didn't speak to him, but he could feel the emotions, the desires, the
Oh yeah.
hunger of the dagger.
It was trying to drink people's blood.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It was wicked,
It's a thing,
to its
and
core.
it's definitely been utilized a lot in the new Star Wars canon with the books and comics, is the idea of these Sith that have like basically possessed objects.
Yeah,
And that it's they've used it multiple times. Even just in this book, you have a mask that somebody's using that has has a old Sith spirit essentially attached to it. You have the dagger. So
you
and
have the
then in the comics,
lightsaber, the Noctis
the
lightsaber.
Noctis lightsaber. In the comics, there's a ton of that type of stuff going on as well. Momin, I think, is the name of a Sith that's like imbued in a mask in the comics. So it's kind of a new canon thing that they've really leaned in on this. And it's kind of a nice little tool that they can use because the Sith are supposed to be rare, right?
Right.
And so there's only ever supposed to be a master and apprentice, and so that kind of limits storytelling sometimes because we already know so many of them. Like if it's not Vader, or if it's not the Emperor, who can it be? If it's
Right.
Dooku or Darth Maul. Like there's a limited list of these guys that it could be, and so they have to come up with creative ways of still having formidable opponents for the Jedi. And so they come up with the Asajj Ventress of the world, where she's
Yeah.
she's not truly a Sith, but she's kind of like an acolyte, and she's and then they have the Inquisitors, so that's another idea that they can have not true Sith, but they're still in it. So this is another way that they can do that, where they can say, all right, this, Emperor's dead, Vader's dead, but we still need someone for Luke to face off against. So let's have this Sith from ancient times imbue a mask and take over somebody's body. It's creative. I like it.
I mean, are they just playing off the holocrons then? Because that's the Sith holocrons. Like if I'm remembering from the video games, like they had similar
Yeah, same idea.
dark abilities.
And then they have the Wayfinders.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the idea that the Sith have these objects that have been found, the Jedi, same idea, but with the Jedi, it's more like information that was left behind. Whereas the Sith, it's like they have a really hard time with dying. Like they do not want to die.
They're parasites.
And it was something I was thinking about a lot as I was reading this book. The Jedi are very much when they come to the end of their life, it's almost like a good thing, right? They're becoming one with the Force. And so they almost allow it. We see it happen with multiple Jedi, Obi-Wan, Luke, you see where they basically say, all right, it's my time. Let me go ahead and let myself go, and I will now become one with the Force. The Sith, not so much. You have Darth Maul, who basically like tried to cling on to life so much that he like used stuff from a junkyard to have like spider legs created out of the Force. Like he willed himself to live even though he'd been cut in half. And so these kind of ancient Sith lords who basically are saying, yeah, I'm not going to die. If I can somehow survive this and let my spirit continue on, maybe somehow I'll be able to figure out a way to come back.
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately, like that's what Sidious does, right? Or that's what the Emperor does. And he's able to ultimately come back. So that's what they're all trying to do. They cannot accept death. They want to live forever. And that's what's going on with this Sith stuff and kind of these masks.
Yeah. So the dagger, right? So Rise of Skywalker.
Mm-hmm. How
does it fit with the Star Destroyer? Right? Like
yeah, it's kind of like the shape of it, right? And they know that they're at the right place. They hold it up and it's kind of fits the shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that that's a huge
okay
deal. Yeah, so if you're digging for a deeper meaning, I don't think it's there.
Okay.
It's this book, not that it's trying to fix the sequels by any means, but I think it's trying to fill in. It's trying to make moments in the movie that might have felt a little like, okay, that's interesting, or that's kind of random. This gives it a little bit more meaning.
Yeah.
So now I think this dagger has a little bit more of a meaning now because we saw it in this book and we saw the power of it. whereas in the movie it was used almost as like a unimportant prop, like a MacGuffin, you
I
know?
thought it was the Wayfinder, honestly. I was like, oh, okay, so this is the Wayfinder that he's looking for. And it was like, oh, wait, no, this is not a Wayfinder. This is something totally different.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely sees some violence
Yeah.
in this book. I mean, he's just killing everybody with this thing. And
Yep.
Adam Christopher does not shy away from descriptive deaths. In, blood spatter, I think was some of the terminology that was used.
Yeah. And even the idea of the dagger just like drinking
Yeah, it's
the
drinking
blood
your
of the
blood.
victim and the hum, and it was happy when it was doing this. It's like, yeah, that's a lot.
I'm looking forward to watching The Rise of Skywalker again after reading this book, just to see it like, oh, okay, now let me see how it changes my perception of some of these things. I haven't
Yeah.
had that chance to do that yet, but I do want to do that soon so I can just see like maybe that dagger now suddenly has more meaning or impact to me than it did the first time I saw the movie.
Well, that's the thing. It's like there's things that lend themselves very much to the Force Awakens, right? Family, Ray, what have you, planet that they're all on, all that stuff. Um, but then there's stuff that very much lends itself to these little Easter eggs, these little pieces that then show up in Rise of Skywalker. They're
Mm.
they're there, and it's like, oh, okay, so that's where Lando got the armor from. Like, oh, that's why Lando is on that planet. Oh, that's where the dagger comes in. Oh, that's who Ochi of Bestoon is. Like, that was one very satisfying piece of reading this book, to have, like you said, filling in some of these things that it's like, okay, cool, so Lando is now just like driving around on this planet.
For a long time.
Cool, yeah, for a
Yeah.
very long
It's
time,
a good
but
good
now it makes sense.
yes. That was probably my favorite thing about the book as well, was just the reveals,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense now, or okay, now I know what's behind that scene in the movie. And I appreciate that with Star Wars books. That's kind of their purpose, right?
Right.
Isn't that the purpose? Like, we can just watch the movies and be fine. You don't necessarily need all the backstory, but there is so much space for backstory and so much space, like all these background characters, like Ochi. In the movie, he's a skeleton.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, some dude was, hunting. Now he's a character that has shown up in multiple comics, has been really fleshed out. Now he's in a major character in this novel that Luke has to face off against. He's a much bigger character in the expanded, quote unquote, expanded universe. But it didn't have to be. You don't need that. But if
Right.
you're the type of fan that wants that, that's what the books and comics are for.
Yeah.
So I absolutely appreciated the depth of the story, and then kind of filling in some of those blanks.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun knowledge to have. It
Yeah,
adds color, right? Like, you watch the movie, it's not black and white, but it's like it's black and white. And then you read the books and it turns everything to full color because you have more detail.
yeah. One of the things that I always struggle with is kind of keeping straight the different factions, kind of in this time period. I still don't know that I have it straight. There's the Imperial Remnant,
Yeah.
but then there's also, I guess, the beginnings of the First Order at this time, but I don't know that it's been fully established. The Remnant becomes the First Order, or the Remnant is what precedes the First Order.
Yeah.
And then you have the Final Order, which is like you have the Emperor kind of doing his thing with the
Sith Eternal.
Sith Eternal, and then you have these acolytes of the Beyond that are not really associated to the Sith Eternal. So it's like, you got some Sith stuff going on. You got the Empire, you got the First Order, and it's like, how does it all connect? I'm getting a clearer picture of that, but there's definitely still some blurry lines that I almost wish there was a guide to, guide to this time period where they literally kind of lay out, how it's all connected and when one started and one ended, or maybe they all
The politics of everything,
yeah, the politics
the
of
factions in politics.
yeah. And I know they've done those type of kind of resource guides in the past. I don't know that they've done one specific to this era yet.
Yeah.
If that book's out there, if you're listening to this right now, hit me up with the link, because I don't think it's out there yet, but I would love a little more clarity
Well,
on some of that.
I mean, even then, you mentioned the Imperial Remnant, and so we have Pryde
Mm,
working, who's part of the Imperial Remnant, but working with the CCSA or the CSA or the ESPOs, and it's
yes,
like they're the
the
new
corporate sector.
force, right? So
So
it's
I
like the corporate sector's moving back into it and
yeah,
trying to, like you said, trying to map out how everything is connected, who's actually allied with who's actually the same group but under a different name. I'd be interested in seeing that. That'd be
yeah.
pretty fun to work through. But
Pride was a surprise to me because I almost originally didn't even connect that it was that character from the Rise of Skywalker. He's only in the Rise of Skywalker. He's one that, like, you if you want to complain about Star Wars, one of the things I don't like about a lot of the Star Wars movies is when they just add a character kind of for no reason. Like, did we
yeah,
need him? And it seems like they do that a lot. They'll just kind of say, okay, here's a new movie. We need new characters instead of fleshing out the already existing characters. And so he was one of those that they kind of threw in at that last movie. I mean, I like the actor, being Doctor Who fans. We've seen
right.
him in
Yep.
Doctor Who. He did a great job in Doctor Who. And I thought he did a great job in this movie. He's a great actor, but the character was kind of randomly added.
Right.
And when they had his scenes, he's only in a couple scenes in the book, and he's
Yeah.
at a much earlier point in his career, I think. But he's kind of he's like the worst boss in the world type of vibe.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Total jerk, thinks really highly of himself, looks down on everyone that works for him, has a lot of the internal thoughts about like looking down on people and, how, he's going to eventually be the greatest, blah, blah, blah. I didn't
Making
feel
up
like,
titles for himself.
yes,
That's
I didn't feel like it fit what I had gathered from the Rise of Skywalker for him. In the
yeah.
Rise of Skywalker, he felt like much more of like, this accomplished, warrior that had been part of the wars and now had been, faithfully serving the Emperor. And I don't know, he had much more of a put together official vibe. Whereas in this book, it's almost like he's a complete pretender.
He's pulling flasks out of his jacket
Yeah, like
and
I was like, wait, is this the same guy? I had to look it up to make sure it was the same guy. I thought maybe it was his brother.
I mean, 13 years, right? 13 years go by. Maybe he's a totally different person in that time frame.
Yeah, I
A
guess
lot
if
of
we
things
all
can
look back
change.
13 years back in our careers, we're probably very different people, but in movies it's different. This isn't
Right,
real life,
right.
to have it maybe connect a little better as far as personality. Sometimes I think a writer really nails a character personality wise, like based on what I've seen in the movies, and sometimes I feel like they're a little off. I felt like this one was a little off. Unless, I'd love to interview Adam Christopher and ask him about that. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe he did want to show growth in the character. But yeah, I just felt like the character didn't quite fit what I would have expected from a younger version of Pryde.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Like he's an interesting character in the book, just the arrogance that he has and his approach even to Ochi. Like Ochi's just a joke to him.
Oh yeah,
Um,
he kept calling
it's
of Bestoon, but like he
yeah,
didn't believe Bestoon was a real place, type
right.
of thing. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it was just a joke. But there's that connection, right? Like he was the one that was contacted as the go-to by the Sith Eternal. So like there is some I would be interested to know how that is established. Like how does this Imperial remnant arrogant dude that's kind of just like floating around working with the corporate sector, how is he ultimately connected back to Exegol and the Sith Eternal and like when and where did that take place?
Yeah.
Especially based on the impression that you get of him from this book that he's just starting out. I don't know. He
Yeah,
doesn't much have a record
he's
from what it
definitely
seems
part
like.
of the, Imperial remnant. And I think in the Rise of Skywalker, they mentioned that he had fought in the whatever they call it, the wars, but he had fought in the wars before, leading up to this. So I assumed he was part of kind of the Galactic Civil Wars, that we saw in the original trilogy.